This week on the Ocean Cruises podcast, we are speaking with Holly Martin from the YouTube sailing channel Hippie Sailing. Holly was raised as a child, sailing the world and living aboard with her parents and siblings before the family decided to live off-grid. After university, Holly decided to work and travel and then follow in her parents' footsteps and sail the world. She bought and completely refit her 27-foot sailboat named Gecko. She is sailing solo and has so far traveled down the east coast of the States to the Caribbean, through the Canal and across the Pacific to French Polynesia. If you want to follow Holly's journey, check out her YouTube channel, Hippie Sailing. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, watch the interviews on YouTube, and download the audio on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you'd like to become a supporter of the podcast, consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/Ocean Cruisers.
What did you start off as? Like, were you a sailor as a kid, or did you come from like a maritime kind of family? How was it?
Yeah, so actually I was one of those boat kids. My parents met in the Caribbean. My dad was on a Cal 25, and his dad gave it to him after high school, and they sailed together for a little bit. And then his dad left and was like, keep the boat. And my mom was teaching sailing on the beach in the Caribbean. And they sort of met, fell in love, started sailing together, crossed through the Panama Canal, and then in the Pacific, my mom found out she was pregnant with my brother. And then they just kept going. And then after him, they had me, and they sort of planned me to fall between hurricane seasons because they were in New Zealand. Right. And they wanted to leave. To have their season up in Fiji, New Cal. So they were like, all right, if she's born in December, then by April, she'll be old enough to go to sea. So we'll plan it that way. And then, yeah, so that was the first 5 years of my life. We're on the Cal 25. And then my mom found out with 4 people. Yeah, but like 2 babies, because my brother and I were between 0 and 5, but still, yeah, tiny boat. And then my mom found out she was pregnant again with my sister. So they had just finished their circumnavigation, and they went to North Carolina, bought a steel hull boat, 33 foot. My dad ripped everything out of the inside, so it was just the hull, and then completely built it up from scratch, sort of centered around this big diesel heater. And then with the 5 of us, they sailed up to the Arctic for 4 or 5 years. We'd ice it in the winter, and they'd put us in school for a couple of months. And then we sailed down to Maine when I was 11, and that was when we stopped. So yeah, I guess it's my parents' fault.
Wow. So yeah, land life is just not normal for you. You've been born and brought up and moved around on the water. That's crazy.
Yeah. So it feels really natural. And I was so it's really fun. I'm in Maine for 3 weeks. It's the first time I've been back in the States for a year and a half. And I'm reading through all my I always kept a journal when I was a kid, starting at 13. So I'm reading through all of those. And in every single age that I always write about how much I miss being on the boat and how much I miss the water and how much I love sailing. And I would whenever I had the opportunity to sail, like every summer, that was all I did. You know, my classmates were getting internships because I studied marine science in college, and I was just teaching sailing because I needed to be on the water. So it's just always been part of my life.
So, right. So you were born on a boat. Well, maybe not born on a boat, but you were brought up on a boat from being 0 till what age?
About 11, I think, was when we stopped living on the boat. Yeah.
So all of your like early childhood memories will be being on a 25-foot sailboat. Yeah,
pretty much. And that's why when people say, wow, your boat's so small, I'm like, actually,
I have a lot of space.
Really
yeah. Yeah. Did they not think I mean, I suppose it depends what you're used to. They started out as a couple sailing on the 25 foot. Did they ever think of like upgrading to a bigger boat so like they upgraded to a 33? Was that too much space almost?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, as kids, you don't really think about that stuff, but they just didn't really have any money. They did it all on a shoestring budget. So the boat was the size that they could afford. And they've always been pro small boat. And I think back in the day, like they started in the 80s, people used to have smaller boats. And they said if you saw a 40-foot boat out there in like the late 80s, early 90s, that was a big boat. And
Yeah.
now that's kind of the norm. So it just changes.
Yeah. Right. Wow. Okay. So that's like a really, really interesting story. I mean, you were basically brought up on the water. At what age did you actually start doing sailing stuff, like, helping your parents out and actually moving the boat around?
Um, I started to get interested in it when I was 9 or 10.
Okay.
But a lot of, so then we were in really dangerous waters. Like we sailed from Norway to Svalbard to Greenland to Labrador, and they didn't want us out in the cockpit without them being awake. So my brother and I would share a watch, and we'd be in the Dodger, it's actually was pretty much exactly like my Dodger, just a little lump over the companionway, and we'd huddle in
Total
there
box.
together. Yeah, we weren't allowed out of the Dodger. And we would have, I don't know, like an hour watch while my parents slept. But a lot of time we were doing school too, because we were sort of partially homeschooled, partially in public school. And I think my parents wanted us to not feel like we had to work and wanted us to sort of be kids and play. So they didn't involve us a ton in the sailing of the boat. And I think that's why when I started to be an adult, I wanted to pursue it for myself because I had that childhood and everyone asked me, "Oh, so you must know everything about sailing." And I was like, well, not really, but maybe I should, maybe I want to. And so it sort of piqued my interest to learn more about it.
That's really cool. Right. So you kept journals when you were a kid, and like you looked
Yeah.
like at some point, I imagine like you look back on those journals. Did it ever strike you like how different of a childhood you have had like now as an adult, like looking back on that type of stuff? Because obviously, like when you're a kid, you don't know anything. The only thing you know is like the space that your parents put you in. Like, do you look
Yeah.
back and think like, whoa, like this is so different to how everybody else has brought up?
Mostly starting when I started cruising on my boat, I was like, oh my God, my parents were crazy. I can't
Yeah.
imagine doing this with kids.
Yeah.
It gives me a whole new level of appreciation because just, and I know it's probably different being on passage with another person, but just sailing the boat is enough. But I can imagine, when shit hits the fan, that's when everything happens. So that's probably also when the kids are puking and someone falls out of their bunk, and you also have to deal with the boat. And like, yeah, I don't know. It seems really nuts to me. The older I get, the more I appreciate what they did for us.
Right. Yeah. And at what point did your parents decide like to stop doing the sailing and just become more land based, or like get maybe the place that you're in now?
Mhm. My brother and I maybe my brother was 13, but they thought it was important for us as teenagers to have more of our own space and to be because we were in a different school every year, and high school's a hard time anyway. They thought that if we had the same high school 4 years in a row, it would sort of give us a better chance to learn what it was like to be more of a normal kid and get into college and stuff. So that was sort of their logic, was like, yeah, we want them to have a life where they can have friends that aren't just for 6 months, but maybe a little longer.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of makes sense. I get that. What age was that then? Because like our high school in the UK is different to yours. You do high school at
Oh, yeah.
16, do you?
High school starts, I think I was 13, my first year of high
Oh, wow.
school. It's ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. Yeah. But my brother's a year older, so I guess I was 11 or 12 when we stopped, and it was when I was in 7th grade and he was in 8th grade. And we
Right.
rented a little house on the water, and it was probably pretty small, but I remember we were just freaked out by how big it was.
Hmm.
And we would all, like, if my mom was cooking dinner, we would all be sitting in the kitchen around the table because we were used to being so close to each other. And if I came home from school with my sister and my mom was in the living room, we'd be like, "Mom, where are you? I'm in the living room."
You can't see your
It was
family.
really
You're in
like,
different rooms.
this
Yeah.
house is too big.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. I mean, do you look back on that as being a positive? I mean, like, I suppose high school was different back then because you're older now. It's definitely different now than it was like 15 years ago. Would you have preferred to have carried on sailing around and learned more about the world? Or like, do you look back on those years and think, yeah, it really was worthwhile as being put in like a normal school and, staying there for the full high school experience?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say. A part of me really missed sailing the whole time I was in high school and sort of wished that we hadn't stopped. But I think a part of me wouldn't have developed if we had been, just our insular family on the boat. I think it's important as a kid to, I don't know, have friends and do dumb things and know that you have this routine and then go off as an adult and do whatever you want to do, but sort of have a base and be socialized, like people socialize their dogs. I think my
Mm.
parents were like, all right, now it's time for the kids to learn how to be a little more normal and not so strange.
Right, okay. And what did so after you guys, or so you had a younger, and
Oh, wait, sorry, you're frozen. Uh-oh. My parents have really bad internet at their house.
hello.
Oh, there we are. Sorry, my parents have a really bad internet connection. It's
Oh
actually
no,
worse here than it is in French Polynesia.
oh right, no worries. It's fine. Yeah, it just said mine's unstable as well. I don't know what. Oh no, maybe that was yours and it's getting it confused or something.
It's definitely this one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So you said you've got like a younger sister and an older brother.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Have they followed in like a similar type of life path to what you have? Because you've all been brought up in exactly the same way, kind of.
Yeah. So interestingly, my brother, who's the closest in age to me, is totally not doing what I'm doing. He
Right.
has a bioengineering smart person job that I don't really understand. And
Okay.
he married his high school sweetheart and they just bought a house and they're pretty close to my parents in Maine and they're both yeah, they just love being in the same place and having their roots. But my sister, who she was only 8 when we stopped sailing, so really most of her remembered life was on land, but she teaches scuba diving in Hawaii, so she's kind of a little more on the
Okay.
path. But I think we're all varying degrees of following my parents, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, right. Okay, that's interesting. Um, okay, so like they have so they left boat life for what, like 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, something like that. So you guys could do high school. Did they go back on the water after that, or were they like, okay, now we're finished, we've made life on land?
Yeah, they kind of, well, they always kept sailing as part of their lives because my dad's always worked on boats. And my mom immediately started running this sailing camp and sort of built it from
Oh
a
wow.
program. I think when she started, there were 8 kids, and now there's 50 kids a week. And we would
Oh,
always do that in the summer with her. And my dad now has his own business doing finished carpentry or woodwork on boats and for people's houses. And we would always sail in the summer. So they've kept it as part of their lives, but I don't think they're going to cruise again. They bought 25 acres of forest and cleared it themselves and built their own solar house in the middle of the woods, which is why the internet's so bad because it's a 1,000 foot or like more like a 2,000 foot cable that they dug under the dirt to get from the road to their house.
oh my gosh. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So they've really settled.
Yeah, they have. It's
Right,
long
okay.
cable. It's a big commitment.
Yeah. That's so cool. That's such a great way to live. So that's like and have they gone like full, planted all the vegetables and fruits and that type of stuff?
Yeah, my mom has a big garden, and I've always felt like farming and sailing go hand in hand. Because when you're at sea in a bad storm, you're always like, oh God, I just wish I could sit in a plot of land and stick my hands in the earth and smell alive things. And
Mm.
then when I'm on land, I'm always dreaming of the ocean. So I feel like there's this a lot of times you see sailors do really earthy land stuff when they're done sailing, which I find interesting.
Yeah, I suppose it's probably like a bit calming, really, isn't it? I mean, if you spend all your time like bopping around and being thrown all over the place, it must be nice to like get back to a house and feel soil through your fingers rather than like living in an apartment in a city or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. That would be so hard to go from being on a boat to being in a city.
Yeah.
It would be a real transition.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, it's something like me and my wife have spoke about it like quite a few times because we're intending on doing like a circumnavigation. We want to try and make it last about 15 years because we think we can see a lot in 15 years. And we don't want to
Yeah,
like look back on the trip and be like, wow, we didn't go there and we should have done, or maybe we should have an extra season here. We want to actually do it. And
right.
yeah, it's always it's tempting for us as well to like just get somewhere, not even near a city or maybe in a completely weird country, and just like get a bit of land and get some solar panels and do a little cabbage patch type of situation.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just tempting. I think once you've lived that life, and like you're relying on like solar and the earth to just provide what you need. Living in a city just seems like, I don't know, doesn't seem real.
Yeah, not appealing. It's hard. I
Yeah.
think it's the nature thing. But even coming from being on my boat for so long to now living on land for, okay, like 2.5 weeks, but I didn't realize how much attention I paid to like the compass points and what the clouds are doing. And I find myself when I'm walking around towns, I'm like, oh, which direction is north? And like, is there going to be a rain squall that's coming through? And it's a totally different way of thinking. And the more separated you are from that, I think the more you just feel like you're in a really foreign environment. So maybe that's why
Mm,
we're drawn to places where we still feel a connection with nature. Because on a boat,
yeah.
it changes. Like if it's a rainy day, then it's gonna change your whole day when you're on a boat. But in a house, it doesn't really matter. You just go from your house to your car to the other inside places.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing for a lot of people that like live in cities or just like in, normal rural areas, like outside of a city, perhaps, like nature really doesn't affect you that much unless you live in Spain where I do. And if it rains, this country just shuts down. Like this place is not suited for any type of weather other than sun. Um, but yeah, you're just completely disconnected from it. And yeah, I mean, it probably makes sense. Like if you're on a farm, like if it rains, that's going to affect whatever you're growing outside. Do you know what I mean? You need the
Yeah.
sun because you need the solar panels to be working still. You need to get some sun for your food. So yeah, I suppose it's like a similar type of lifestyle, but completely opposite. Oh, weird.
Yeah, complimentary, maybe.
Yeah. So okay, right. You finished high school and then you went to college and you said you did marine science, was it?
Marine science. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And was that because you wanted to get back on the water and like utilize that somehow, or was it just a random choice?
I don't know. Sometimes I think I should have just done a woodworking apprenticeship or something, but I guess it was always in my family. Education was always placed really high. It was like this, you should have a college degree. And so it wasn't really an option for me because I was just sort of, I don't know, like brainwashed makes it sound bad. I don't think a college education is ever bad, but I always knew I was going to go to school. But the only thing I knew I liked was the ocean. And so my mom was like, what if you do marine science? And that sounded good to me. And I think, I don't know what I was thinking. I did my first year of school in Florida because I wanted to be somewhere warm. And the classes were great because the field work, we'd go to the beach and net fish and study them. But Florida wasn't such a great fit for me. So I ended up transferring to the University of Maine.
Okay.
And yeah, it was a great school, really outdoorsy, just campus in the middle of the woods, really good sort of people. But I didn't ever want to be a scientist or work in a lab because I tried that a little bit and it just wasn't my thing. But then I discovered you can do a lot of field work with a marine
Mm,
science degree, and that's really fun. And so that's what I did for 4 years. One of my jobs was helping scientists do field work, and that was great.
nice. So when you say
Mhm.
when you say marine science, like in the UK, okay, I'm probably getting this wrong, but I know a number of people who've done like marine biology at university. Is that the same thing, where it's mostly biology, like related to like fish or mammals or something like that, or is it more about like the chemistry of water and stuff?
Yeah, so mine was marine science with a biology concentration.
Okay.
But that meant that I also took a lot of chemistry, physics, calculus. So it was, yeah, like I would learn about water flow and dynamics. But then my core, yeah, that's what my core classes. And then my electives were about the biology side. But it was kind of the idea of UMaine for marine science is that you you learn about everything as a whole in the ocean because it's all connected anyway, and then you can kind of focus in on one thing in particular, but not forgetting everything else.
Yeah. What type of job would you get out of that? Like, I imagine it's just a marine scientist. Like, is there any like career direction that you can go in that is a bit different? In a, like if you do an MBA, you can do like a bunch of different stuff, or accounting. You can, like, is it the same for that, or is it limited to like research work?
Yeah, I guess you could go the research route. You can go the education route, which is what I did. So I started teaching kids about the ocean on boats.
Nice.
And then I ended up with my fieldwork job, which not all the fieldwork techs had marine science degrees, but it really helped because I didn't have so much experience that I had the degree. So I guess, yeah, I don't know. I think that's all I know because that's all I've done, but I'm sure there's other stuff you can do with it if you want to.
Yeah. And so at what point did you decide? I mean, because you were like pretty, settled in society at this point. You got your education, you got your job, and you've traveled a bit. What made you want to sack it all off and then just start like sailing around the world on a small boat?
I guess I never really committed to anything after college. I did 3 months teaching at a marine science summer camp in the Caribbean. And then I hopped on tall ships and sailed from the Caribbean up to Canada, mostly as crew, mate. Sometimes we'd have kids on board. And then I flew to San Francisco, and for a couple of months I worked on charter boats there. And then I lived on a farm in Washington State. And then I sort of would do one thing for 3 months and then get bored and do the next thing. And my idea was that I loved sailing and I didn't have any money, so I just found jobs where I got paid to sail, but I also love traveling, so I switched it up a lot. And I didn't really think that I could have my own boat until I think I was 23. One of my friend's dads was a like old salt sailor, and I was just chatting with him one day and sort of telling him about my dreams. And I said, yeah, maybe I can meet someone who has a boat who lets me sail with them. And he was like, why don't you just buy your own boat? And that was the first time I realized, oh yeah, maybe I can do that. And then when I was 25, I just bought my own boat, and yeah, here I am.
Right, that's really cool. So, and the boat that you got was it on the hard when you bought it, or was it in the water and then you did like your refit on it? How did it work out?
Yeah, it was on the hard. So at that point, that was in my second year, I think, of working. I was working contracts on research ships. So I'd work a couple of months, then have a couple of months off, and I was backpacking. So I'd spend all my money traveling, living in hostels, and then go back to work. And when I was in the Philippines, I broke my arm mountain biking, and I had to fly back to the States for surgery. And then I couldn't go back to work. I couldn't travel. And I was at my parents' house, and I was really, really bored. So I just started looking online for boats sort of within a driving radius of their house. And I eventually found that one. I'd show them all to my dad because he's like my boat encyclopedia. And when I showed him this boat, he got really excited about it. And he said, yeah, let's drive down and look at it. And it was hauled out. And the deal was that I didn't want to buy it until it had been launched, just so I knew, it didn't instantly start sinking.
Yeah.
And the deal was that if they launched it and I liked it, I'd sign the contract and it was my boat. And if they launched it and I didn't like it, I would just pay for it to be hauled back out. And then that was that. Yeah, so I did like it. And my dad and I sailed it up to Maine. I think it didn't have any, the whole summer I had it. There were no batteries. So he brought a battery, and we hot wired his chart plotter onto the battery, and we had these suction cup running lights, and we'd have a flashlight on the compass because it was an overnighter, and it was just really, really exciting.
That's really good. Taking it back to basics, yeah.
Yeah, and that was the whole summer I sailed it in Maine. I had no depth sounder. And I think halfway through the summer, my dad lent me his chart plotter and the battery. But until then, I was like, I look back on that time and I was such an idiot. I didn't know what I was doing. I remember once I took this shortcut that we used to take in the Whaler between these two islands, and there was a a stick that someone had put in the sand. And I remembered it was really important that you had to go on one side of the stick, but I didn't remember which side. So I just went for it and it turned out to be okay. But there's like, yeah, you could definitely hit some rocks if it was wrong. But I think it was just fool's luck.
Yeah, especially if you're used to a whaler and then you come up with like a keeled
Yeah, like a
sailboat.
keel on your boat. It was so stupid.
Yeah. I think, you always have those moments. Like I look back on stuff from last summer and I'm like, should I have done that? That probably wasn't really worth the risk. Do you know what I mean? Like, should I go round the island or should I just go through this little channel? And it's like, oh, there was only 6 inches under the keel. That was a bit stupid. But
Yeah.
I think you always do it still. Right. So, so did you get the boat with the intention of like taking it across the Pacific, or did you just fancy getting a boat and seeing like what happened out of it?
Yeah, I don't think my intention when I bought it was to ever be soloing as far as I have done. I never planned to cross the Pacific alone. I thought I would get it and sail down through the Caribbean. I did want to get to the Pacific, but I thought I'll find someone to come with me. Like I'll convince my sister or a friend or something. And I can't cross the Pacific by myself. But then I just really, really loved sailing solo and decided, well, I'm just going to keep doing this because it's really nice.
Yeah. So, okay, so you had the boat and you were sailing around Maine. That must be pretty tidal and quite cold.
Yeah. Yeah, it was in the summer. So it was summer temperatures.
So still
And
cold.
still cold, but my ship job was in Antarctica, so that was colder. So I would come off those cruises and be in Maine, and I was like, this is just tropical. This is amazing.
Right, okay.
And yeah, I didn't really know how to anchor, so the tidal thing didn't matter. I would just throw the anchor down, and I think I had like 10 feet of chain and the rest rope, so I'd just like toss it all down on the bottom and hope I didn't drag, which I didn't because I probably had like 12 to 1 scope out or something. But it was just, yeah, I sailed the boat, and as I was sailing it, I was kind of making a list of what I liked and what I didn't like, so that when I hauled it out, I had an idea of what I wanted to do to the boat. And yeah, I hauled it in October, I think. My dad had just started his business, and so he had this big barn work. It's like a sailor's dream. My boat was put right next to his barn where he has all the tools that you want. And yeah, just tore everything out of my boat except for the bulkheads and the seats and stuff. And had I known how much work it was going to be, I would not have done that, but I did, and it worked out. So in the end, I'm really happy, and I learned a lot too, a ton.
Yeah. Do you know, and it's even if it's just a case of like you understand the bones of that boat now, like if something breaks, you know exactly where to go and look for what might have broke. Yeah, it's so much useful. Like, I mean, it's useful anyway if you're just generally good at DIY and you have a general whereabouts of like where things are. But yeah, like what you did, you basically completely stripped it out. It's like, did you do it? Was the full thing, like you did new plumbing, wiring, everything?
Yeah, I did it all. And it was really fun because I'd go to work for 2 or 3 months and make a bunch of money and then spend it all on my boat. And I was working, I mean, those 10 months I was working so hard because at work we worked 7 days a week, 12-hour shifts. And then I would come back to my boat and I worked 7 days a week, like maybe 8-hour days. But it was, I don't know, it was just amazing. It was hard, and every project I started was something I'd never done before, which was really daunting. But I always had my dad, I'd be like, Dad, how do I do this? And he would sort of show me, do this, then this, and this, and then just let me go at it. And it gave me, I think that actually gave me the confidence to do what I'm doing, because I know if something goes wrong, I'm like, oh, yeah, I know exactly what this is, and I know how to fix it. And I think if I didn't know my boat as thoroughly, I wouldn't have the confidence to go offshore in the way that I am doing.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, it does provide you with a lot more confidence. Yeah, even just basic stuff, like you start getting water in your bilge, just like, okay, it's going to come from one of 4 places, for example, rather than like worrying about it. So yeah, that's really good. How much input did you get from your parents when you were like refitting it? Because obviously they've got a wealth of knowledge,
They were invaluable. I mean, my dad was probably the best teacher I could have ever asked for, because I would be like, I want to rebuild all my lockers. And he was like, yeah, that's a good idea. Make it the way you want it. Let me show you how to template. And he would give me a half-hour demonstration on templating and then help me figure out, all right, these are the materials you need. Now just go try to do it. And if you come up to a sticking point, let me know. And it sort of gave me the confidence to run and try something. And if I came up with a problem, I could ask him, or if I needed a certain tool, he would tell me what it was. And I don't know. I don't think I could have done it without him, because it would have been such a daunting task, but it felt really comfortable. And I trust him. You hear so many stories about people who buy the wrong boat or do something that they didn't need to do, or make it way more complicated than it needs to be. But usually I'm the one being like, oh, Dad, I don't want it to be that simple. Like, I want something a little more luxurious, which is nice, because then I get to decide where I spend the money, instead of having someone tell you like, oh, you definitely need a fridge, or you definitely need some other fancy thing I don't have.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I mean, I can imagine it's just invaluable. Like, I've learned mostly from making like ridiculous mistakes. And it's like whenever I've had somebody around me who's way more experienced, or, they know a bit more about electrical or mechanical, something like that, those are the projects that have gone really well. And generally the other ones have gone like horribly wrong. And it's like, well, I know how an engine works because I've, virtually broke it. That's put it back together enough times now, so I know it works. Right. So how you got the boat refit on land? Was that like over a summer, or did you do that over a winter with the intention of getting it back in the water for a summer?
So it was hauled out from October to August, I think.
Okay.
And I spent about half of that time at work. So whatever half of that is, like 4 or 5 months of really intensive work to do the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then I had to go back to work till the end of October. So I left Maine like the last day of October and sailed to North Carolina. I had a month to get to North Carolina before my last contract at work. And I had to get the boat south, because in Maine, by the time it's the end of November, it's kind of too late to leave. So I sort of scurried down the coast, left my boat in the marina, did my last stint at work. Whatever money I made then, I sort of paid off all the loans I owed my family. And then what was left over, that was my cruising budget, which was like $2,000. And then I just took off for the Caribbean. And I was like, well, we'll see what happens. When I run out of money, I'll figure it out. I can always find work somewhere. And it's worked out.
Okay. Yeah. And what, because you started recording like way early on, because I remember like years ago you were putting videos online, although I think some were like shorter and some were longer. I can't remember. But yeah, and when did you decide to do that? Was that always like a means of being able to afford to cruise, or was it a case of you just wanted to like experiment creatively?
Yeah, I think so. My parents made money by writing articles for Cruising World magazine.
Oh, okay.
And that was the way they funded their trips. So I had it in my head that I ultimately wanted to do something like that. And I don't remember why I filmed the refitting of my boat, because I didn't have a YouTube channel then, and I don't know if I ever intended to have one. But I think it was just fun, and I spent all day pretty much by myself. And I think humans, we feel a need to document our lives. And like I said, I'm a journaler anyway, so I'm used to sort of keeping up with what I do. And then when I started my passage from North Carolina to Puerto Rico, that was my first big passage. I think that was when I decided I was just going to try putting stuff up on YouTube and see what happened. And I was doing the editing on my iPad on the iMovie app, and it was so slow. And I remember putting things up and was like, well, I'll just try this for a couple months, and you never know what might happen. And it kind of just got more response than I ever would have imagined. And after about a month, I had all these people on YouTube telling me, you should start a Patreon. You could make money this way. And I was like, no one's gonna give me money. This is stupid. I'm just some idiot dicking around on their boat. And I was in Antigua the day that I set up my Patreon, and I remember seeing like, I don't know, maybe 10 people signed up, and my eyes were just like, oh, what? This is crazy. But then I had this moment where I was like, all right, this is sort of the turning point where I commit to doing this. And suddenly I felt a lot more responsibility. Like now I'm not just messing around anymore. If I have a platform where people are paying for content, that means that I need to actually generate it on a schedule so that I give them what they're paying for. And I kind of, since it was started out so small, I was like, yeah, sure, why not? What's going to happen? Probably not much. And then for a while, I didn't like it. And actually, after 3 or 4 months, I decided to stop doing videos. And then I made a deal with myself that I'd do it for a year and see at the end of the year if I still liked it, I'd keep going. And if I didn't, just wouldn't do it anymore. And I ended up liking it. But it was kind of an identity crisis, I guess, because, you put out, no matter how real you try to make what you're doing, you're always putting out a version of yourself because you can't include a whole person in one 20-minute video. So even though I put everything in that I film and, I don't try to be something that I'm not, it's still whatever version of me comes out in that video. It's not exactly how I am inside. And for a while that really bothered me. But then I realized even my friends don't get, like, each friend gets a part of who you are. But the only person who really knows who you are is yourself in all your iterations. And there's absolutely no way that you can ever portray your full self online. I think it's impossible. And then I just felt good knowing that I was giving the most real version of me and everything that I do that I could with what I had to work with. And now I've sort of come to terms with that. But for a while it was just weird to see myself on the internet and to see people reacting positively to what I was doing. Because I was like, I don't deserve this praise. And I don't know, I'm just me doing this thing. So it was interesting.
Yeah. It's like, it seems probably basic to you because you've been brought up on a boat sailing around and doing this type of stuff. But like, this what you do is the kind of thing that people read about and think about and like, oh my God, I wonder what this person was like. And, it's like I said, the reason for the podcast is to like tell people stories. Like it is so interesting. And then to find out, what type of person is capable of doing stuff like this and what type of person you need to be to maintain that type of lifestyle where like you see the planet and traveling around. But yeah, I think like the YouTube thing is like quite comforting in a way and then like quite strange in other ways. I hate listening to the sound of my own voice. I've been recording these for a while. I've never listened to a single one of them. Like I record them and then like when I'm editing them, I'm like, if I play it, I'm playing it to make sure that there isn't like terrible swearing. If there's a bit of swearing, that's okay. But that's the only reason. And whenever I talk, I'm like, okay, I know I didn't say anything bad, so skip. I can't stand listening to it. It's really strange. I don't know how I imagine I sound. Maybe like a king or something. Like a British accent. It's like when I listen, I'm like, oh my God, I sound like I'm homeless. Like who sounds like this when they talk? But yeah. So I mean, was that like a process that you had to go through of just becoming more comfortable with putting yourself out there?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to make sure that what I was putting out there was something that was real, because I feel like there's so much out there that's said to be reality TV, and I'm thinking more of like on television shows, not YouTube as much, but even some YouTube, like the really giant YouTube channels, not sailing ones necessarily, but other ones, it says it's real, but it's all scripted. And or people like duck below and put on a bunch of makeup and do their hair, and then they're like, I'm in a storm. And I wanted to make sure that if people were watching me and believing what I did, that it was stuff that was really, really real. So I make a point to not, like, I'll throw a shirt on over my bikini if I'm outside, because I don't want to make it about what I look like on my channel. I'm also really careful about that. But I never change what I'm doing or what I look like. And like if I haven't showered in a week and I just woke up, I'll still film myself, because that's real. And I want people to see that you can just be yourself and do whatever you want to do. It doesn't have to be like, real life isn't perfect, and the same goes for YouTube life. And In a way, it's funny. I don't actually think about the fact that people are watching what I'm doing, because when I film it, I'm by myself, and when I edit it, I'm by myself. And then I put it up, and like you, I never watch it again. And so I kind of forget. And a lot of times I'll pre-edit 3 or 4 if I know I'm not going to have internet for a couple weeks or a couple months. And then by the time it goes up, I either don't have enough internet to even check and read the comments, or it's been so long since I've edited it that I kind of forget what I did. And it just, there feels like there's a separation from, I film it, it feels real, I edit it, it feels real, I post it, and then it's not real anymore.
You never have to listen to it again or watch it again.
Yeah, exactly. Who is that person? I don't know.
Yeah. It's, I think if I did it, and I ever watched it, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm such a tool. Like, I think that's
why I
the
don't
only
want
thing
to
that comes to mind. Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm pretty sure I just watch them back and hate them. So, yeah.
Yeah, especially my early ones, because I learned didn't have any background in video or anything, so I learned really actually from people's comments saying like, I didn't like this, or like this was bad, but they were constructive. I feel like most of the comments are all really nice, but I really took those constructive comments to heart. And so there's a definite, like the first year of videos I put out, I don't know, they're probably pretty bad. And so it's like, I don't know, looking at things you wrote when you were in high school for English essays, you're just like, oh God, I did that.
Yeah. Similar way of looking back type of thing. Or it's like the first love letter you wrote or something
Oh,
like that.
yeah.
Like, oh my God. So young and silly.
Yeah.
So, okay. So you set off from Maine and then you headed down there in the cold, got gradually warmer. And at what point did you decide you were going to leave the Caribbean and then cross the Pacific by yourself?
I guess so. I had a timeline. I wanted to get through the Caribbean. I got to the Caribbean in the end of April, and I wanted to get to Panama by the beginning of October, I think, because the Panama Canal, they were raising their price to go through by a lot.
Yeah. They doubled
And
it.
I wanted to get through before that was raised. And so I was just kind of rushing through, but I wanted to see all the islands. So it was like a week or 2 in each island. And then I was just going to keep going, and I hadn't found someone that I wanted to sail with. I'd had some friends come visit. I had some family come visit, and they were all doing their own things with their own lives. And I didn't want I didn't need a crew. I guess I realized I didn't need someone. And if I was going to have someone sail with me, I didn't want it to be for just 2 weeks, because that's hard. I don't know. You have to teach them how to use your boat, and by the time they learn, they're gone. So I wanted it to be like, yeah, come for 3 months or 4 months, and we can learn how to be around each other and take turns sailing the boat, and it'll be really cool. But then I started to look forward to the Pacific crossing, because I just loved every passage that I did by myself. And then I sort of coveted it. And when people wanted to come, I was like, no, this is mine. I really want this. And I sort of flipped and decided I actually didn't want anyone sailing with me, because I realized it's so easy to make friends. And when I'm in port, I just meet people. And especially in the Pacific, there's a big group. Like, you can't avoid knowing someone in every anchorage. And then when I'm at sea, it's really, really special time for me. And now I actually don't want anyone to sail with me when I'm at sea. I've had it a couple of times for like overnighters, and it's fine, but it's not the same.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, obviously, like, you spent your whole life on boats, like from being a kid, so you'll have a different way of looking at the ocean than most people. I've not. I've had boats for like since I was a teenager, but I still have like a general fear, not of the water. I've got no issue jumping in the water. I know what's down there. Do you have that? Do you have like, I don't suppose, like, not fear as in you're scared, but like a respected kind of fear?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
I feel like with sailing, anytime I start to get a little bit cocky, something happens that's really humbling.
Right. Okay.
And I'm right back down to where I started again.
Right.
But I think I definitely get scared. Like, if I have to go up and change the head sail and it's blowing 40 and there's huge waves, and as soon as you take it down, your boat stops steering and you go broadside to the waves. And I'm like, I don't want to go up there, but I have to. And I think if you're not scared sometimes when you're at sea, you're either lying to yourself or you're really like 80 years old and you've spent 90% of your life in the water and nothing.
Or you just don't care anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay, right. No, it's just interesting because I've spoke to a lot of people like in this format now, but never somebody who's like literally been born and brought up on the water, like people who've, you know, gone in and out, or the parents have sailed or been sailed from being a kid. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just like being on a boat and having the ocean right at the side of you and jumping in whenever you want, that was like your backyard.
Yeah.
Growing up. Incredible.
Yeah. It's cool. And I think I have a really high level of comfort, and maybe my threshold is different. But I think as adventurers, we like to push our thresholds always, and we all have one. So I just push mine too and put myself in situations where I'm like, oh God, I should not have done this.
But what's crazy is like okay, I mean, I'm looking at this from like a European perspective, because for us to start offshore sailing, it's quite easy in a way. Like you can hop around the Meds, you can hop around the Northern Europe, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, that type of thing. And then you can cross the Atlantic, which is really boring and easy. Like there's not much to it at all. Like your first real offshore passage was a big one. You know, like leaving America and headed across the Pacific. Did you feel like you were actually prepared for it? Because I mean, from that point, you'd more or less coastal cruise down to Panama, I'd imagine.
Yeah, so I did want to get experience. So I sailed from North Carolina to Puerto Rico, which took me 2 weeks.
Nice.
And I didn't stop. I sailed right past Bermuda, but I didn't stop because I wanted to have the experience of having a longer passage. And I actually got into 2 pretty nasty storms in that period. And I was constantly close hauled because you kind of do the curve thing where you follow the wind. And yeah, I don't know. I guess I never really thought about it. At that point, I just felt so comfortable with my boat. And I had never sailed downwind on a passage until I left Grenada to sail to Bonaire. Okay. And I was like, whoa, this is so easy. Up to then, it was like my 2 weeks of, you know, being close hauled and going through like 45 knots of wind and heaving to in the Gulf Stream with breaking waves and like scary shit. That was day 1 out. And then just sort of coasting downwind. It was, I just didn't think about it, I guess. At all. I trusted my boat and I trusted myself, and I was nervous for leaving, but I wasn't nervous because I doubted my skills or my boat. It's something I had never done before. So of course you get a little nervous about that.
Yeah, so it's just like the usual nerves of, I suppose, you know, before you go on any passage where, you know, what happens if the weather turns or that type of stuff.
It's not a notorious passage. Like I'm more nervous for the passage to New Zealand that I'll be doing this season than I was for the Pacific, because that one has such a reputation. And that's part of what I'm doing in my haul out is a lot of modifications to my boat, because I know there's a good chance I might be knocked down, and that's terrifying. So I am putting in there's a lot of stuff going on. But for that one, I actually will be quite nervous. But for the Pacific one, it just seemed not easy, but straightforward. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that. You know, I've like got a number of scenarios in my head of like, okay, if the boat turns over and it stays there, like what type of equipment do I need on board? And I was like, I need like a scuba tank in there. I need like lights that I could use underwater. And then I started thinking like, okay, if my family is stuck in a boat and it's upside down, it's filling it with water. And then I'm like, oh my God, this is stupid. Why do I even need to start preparing for this?
Yeah. And it's different for you because you're not alone, and you have people you love and want to take care of. And I think that's a whole different story. That's way more daunting, I would imagine, than just like, you don't need to worry about yourself.
Yeah, it's just completely different. It's like when I head out on the boat and I'm on my own, it's like I put a life jacket on when I'm in the cockpit, because if I do fall over, I want to be able to float around without having to swim for days, because that just sounds easier. But yeah, there's not really anything else to worry about. Like my
Right.
take when I'm on my boat, it's like, okay, if something bad happens and I sink, it's like, well, it's insured. I don't give a shit, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, like if your kids and your wife are on board, then it's like, well,
Totally different.
yeah, you know, insurance ain't going to bring them back. So I kind of need a plan. All right, so just we'll talk about your boat because you've managed to keep things like super basic and
Yes.
have a great life on board.
Mhm.
Incredibly basic. You know, like, I think I remember when I first watched like one of your videos like quite a while back. I was like, oh, it's crazy. She's done like really well, and like a solar panel is like the size of a textbook.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. You know?
I've changed that, but
Yeah, you changed it now. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, you did really well. What was your like? What was the planning behind that? Because obviously, when you left Maine, there wasn't much on there, and you've gradually like upgraded as you've gone along.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just I just didn't have any money and
Right. Okay.
I really wanted to be sailing, and it's something my parents told me. You can spend 5 years working and having the best boat ever, but then during those 5 years, what are you doing? Working. Or you can just go and you'll be doing what you want to do and you'll figure it out. So when I left Maine, I didn't even have AIS. Now I have receive on my VHF. It's like this big,
Yep.
and it'll beep at me, and that's about all it's good for. But that whole passage to North Carolina, I was waking up every 20 minutes to check for ships because that I had no way of knowing if there was anything.
Mm.
And then now that I have a better income, I could go more fancy, but I kind of like keeping things simple. It's I don't feel like I need a fridge, and I'm really happy with my iPad being my only chart plotter. And my only instrument on my boat is depth. And yeah, I don't know. It feels right for me. It's cheaper, one, and two, I just become more tuned to my boat. Like
Yep.
I sleep in the V berth with the hatch open, and if it starts to blow and there's a squall at night when I'm on anchor, I'll instantly wake up because the wind changes on my face. And same for when I'm sleeping at sea. I feel if a squall's coming right before it hits, and I have time to jump up and take down the headsail if I have to. And it just makes me more in tune with my boat. And things aren't important. What's important is that I'm sailing and traveling, and that's kind of what I want to keep in my mind and not get hung up on having all this gear, because that's not why I'm sailing.
Yeah. And it's more stuff to become dependent on as well. And then obviously, like the areas where you sail are pretty remote anyway. So if something breaks and you become dependent on it, then it's just something that you're going to have to get fixed, and then something that's going to like cost you money if you need to repair it. And yeah, I can see the ease of it. I did a podcast with Limpardi, and she's like pretty well known really when it comes to like sailing around the world. And I mean, she didn't even have an engine in her boats, you know, she was just doing it. Yeah, it's crazy. Like I've done a few podcasts with her, but we only put one out, and some of the storms she got caught in, like it's blowing 70 and it's like 5 meter waves. I'm like, oh my God, what did you do? She's like, oh, we just heaved to and have a tea. Like, okay. Just like a completely different way.
Out.
Yeah, like I would be shitting myself completely. Like there'd be no tea being made at all. Just I probably drink myself to death with some of the storms that she's been in. But yeah, like she's exactly the same. It's just like you actually don't need this stuff if it's, and definitely like you said, if you haven't got the cash to do it and it's just going to hold you back waiting for it.
Yeah.
Just take off and go. What were the first things that you decided you wanted to change? Not because it was like necessary, but like out of necessity in a way. Because like the solar panel, you only just upgraded, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, because for about the 6 months before that, my batteries were kind of toast. And when I was at sea, I couldn't actually have anything on, like running lights, AIS, like no instruments. I pretty much sailed blacked out at night, and I'd charge my iPad during the day and then be really careful with its battery at night. And that was how I did the whole Pacific crossing too, was just like pretty much blacked out, but there's no boats really. I didn't see any because I wasn't looking for them. So that was kind of an important thing. I added 100 watts of solar and I put in 2 new batteries. But the first thing I got was a VHF that could receive AIS, because that meant that I could go from 20-minute naps to 40-minute naps when I was at sea, and that's a huge difference. And I think really there's not, besides that and the solar panels, there's not a ton more big deal stuff that I added to my boat. Just, little things here and there to make it what I wanted it, but it's pretty much stayed the same. The mods I'm doing in the boatyard now, though, are kind of safety things. So right now my cockpit drains, it's two hoses that tee together, and then so I have a transom hung rudder and it kind of sits like this. There's a space about this big between the rudder and the back of the boat, and the through hull for the cockpit drain is between the rudder and the boat. So they just don't drain. So I'm gonna, do them properly, cross them, and add two new through hulls so that if I'm in big seas, because right now it doesn't even drain if it rains hard. And this is all in my brain. I'm thinking, okay, if I get knocked down, what are the important things? Cockpit needs to drain. I'm adding tie downs for my dinghy, because up until now I've just tied it off to the stanchions, but once again, I feel like you can rip out your stanchions pretty easily if you get knocked down. So I'm gonna do that, and yeah, just some little things to make it a little more bulletproof. But mostly I'm really happy with what I did to it when I left, and I'm so used to it now. I don't feel like I need anything else.
Yeah. And how long is the sail to New Zealand from where you are now?
So now New Caledonia just opened, and I think from there it's 1,200 miles. I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I don't think it's that bad.
So what's that in your boat? Like a couple of weeks, perhaps?
Yeah, I'm happy if I do 100 miles in a day. It really depends on the weather, and I don't have any light wind sails. That's why my Pacific crossing took so long. I was just becalmed for days. I started to go crazy. But yeah, I always assume it'll take me about the number of days, like 1,000 miles, 10 days. Sort of, it's an easy estimate.
Have you got any buddy boats for this one, or is this just going to be you completely by yourself out there?
Yeah, but this is, I tried buddy boating once at sea and I hated it.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it was a 4-day passage, and because I only receive and I don't transmit AIS, I was the one who had to keep track of the other boat. And because my batteries were dying, I guess they were pretty much dying for a year, I could only transmit VHF within about 4 or 5 miles, and I could only receive AIS within 4 or 5 miles, and my boat is really slow. So I was just overpowered the whole time and stressed out trying to keep really close to the other boat, and it wasn't worth it.
So it became a chore.
It became
rather
a
than like a safety thing. Yeah,
and I didn't get into my Zenny place. So in the Pacific crossing, I just left and was just on my own, which is what it makes so much more sense. I guess if you have a single sideband radio and a sat phone or something, it's probably easier because then you don't have to stay so close. But for me, it doesn't make sense.
It's just, I mean, I think in 10 years, it might be even different again, but now it's so cool. Like when we crossed the Atlantic, we were just like texting everyone. There was, I think, about 6 or 7 boats, and we're all kind of in different positions. We were the slowest. So, everyone was just like giving us weather updates of like, 10 miles ahead, 100 miles ahead, 200 miles ahead. And it was great. Like when I was on nights and I was, just bored sat in the cockpit, because you don't need to do anything. It's just downwind sailing. We were just, text messaging people on other boats, talking bullshit. And it was okay. Keeps you like sane a little bit as well. So what is the plan? Like, you want to get to New Zealand? Are you thinking of like a specific type of route through Asia, or have you even thought that far ahead?
No, that's why I don't even know how far it is to New Zealand. I kind of just look at the next week or two and keep an eye on seasons. Like I know I need to start looking at windows in around October to get to New Zealand, but that's kind of the beauty of this life, is that you don't have to know, because there's always something that comes up that you never would have predicted. And if you have a plan, I feel like you're less likely to jump for the fun other thing that will take you down a path you didn't even know existed. So I don't like to make plans, because I feel like I always end up changing them anyway. So why go through that? just let it come as it does.
Well, you must have an idea. I mean, are you thinking like the beaches in Thailand look very nice, or the beaches in Malaysia look very nice?
I don't know. I'm a little bit wary to go to that part of the world, because I know it's kind of dangerous,
Yeah, in
and I
some
don't.
places, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that's in my head for after New Zealand is Cape of Good Hope. I know that I want to go that route, but after that, I'm not. Yeah, I just don't know. It could be anything, sometimes I think Japan looks really cool and I'd love to see the Philippines, but I know it's kind of sketchy sailing in there. And Thailand would be fun, but it's all sort of a big question mark. I guess I'll just talk to people and see what they've done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think like around that part of the world, like it depends on like geopolitics so much as well. Like Philippines, especially, because like at any given point in the Philippines, like you've got a group of islands there that I can't remember the exact reason, but there's a group of islands that apparently people from the other islands just don't go there. There's war on something to
Yeah.
do with religion. I'm not sure. And like Indonesia can sometimes be weird.
Yeah.
I think you could definitely get to like South Africa, like following a very safe route though. Like a lot of people do it.
Yeah. I think definitely there's a way to do it, but it's
Yeah.
it's so far in the future because I also would love to do Australia and Tonga's still closed and I really want to see
Oh,
Tonga. So I might do a season in New Zealand and then do another season up in the Fiji Tonga area and see some of the places that I couldn't get to this season. And I'd also love to sail around Australia a little bit, Papua New Guinea. I'm not really in a hurry to leave that part of the world. What everyone tells me is that the Pacific is some of the best sailing in the world and definitely to not hurry through. So
yeah.
I'm open to being there another year or two until I'm ready to see something else.
Yeah. Or more.
Yeah, or more of the same thing. Or go back to French Polynesia. I don't know. I really love it there.
Yeah, I know. It's like you started like a lot of your trip in like some of the nicest places, really, when it came to like crossing the Pacific. Like you're definitely in the nicest part of the world. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of nice stuff left to see. Definitely not seen everything yet, but yeah, I think that's really good. Well, listen, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us and yeah, just explain like a little bit more about your story and good luck with the crossing that you've got coming up. Sounds like it's going to be great.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. This was really fun.